The massive space station hung in the dark like a silver moon. It was bigger than most cities, with lights that sparkled like stars across its surface. Inside, the main meeting hall stretched out so far that the walls disappeared into shadows. This was where the most powerful beings in the galaxy came to make decisions that affected trillions of lives. Elena Vasquez walked through the enormous doors, her shoes clicking on the smooth metal floor. Behind her came 11 other humans, all wearing simple blue uniforms. They looked tiny compared to the other beings already in the hall. To their left, creatures made of living crystal hummed softly to each other. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. These were the crystallines, masters of energy shields and defensive technology. They had been traveling between stars for over 10,000 years. Near the center of the room, a group of insect-like beings moved together like water flowing. They were the Zephyrians, and they shared one mind between thousands of bodies. When one of them learned something, they all knew it instantly. Their ships could work together so perfectly that enemy forces never saw them coming. At the far end sat 3 creatures so large they needed special chairs. Each one was the size of a small building, with skin like metal and eyes that glowed soft blue. The Tangent-class beings were living weapons. In space battles, they didn't need ships. They were the ships. Elena counted over 200 different species in the hall. Some looked almost human. Others were so strange she couldn't figure out which end was the head. All of them had one thing in common. They had been exploring space and fighting wars while humans were still learning to make fire. "The meeting will begin," announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. At the front of the hall, a platform rose from the floor. On it stood Chancellor Zorvac, leader of the Galactic Council. His people, the hegemony, looked like tall, thin humans, covered in silver scales. They were famous for being logical and fair. "We face the greatest threat our galaxy has ever known," Zorvac said. His voice carried clearly to every corner of the massive room. "The entropy swarm has awakened from the dead spaces beyond our borders. They consume everything: matter, energy, even the space between stars. 17 star systems have already been destroyed completely." A hologram appeared above the platform. It showed a map of the galaxy with red dots marking the lost systems. The red was spreading inward like spilled blood. Elena had seen the reports. Entire solar systems simply vanishing, leaving nothing behind. Not even empty space. Just nothing. The entropy swarm didn't conquer planets. They erased them from existence. "Each species will contribute according to their strengths," Zorvac continued. "The crystallines will provide shield technology. The Zephyrians will coordinate our fleet movements. The Tangent-class beings will serve as our heavy assault forces." One by one, he listed what each species would do. The 4-armed builders would construct the defensive stations. The telepathic scholars would handle communications across vast distances. The machine-like calculators would plan battle strategies. Elena waited. She knew humans would be mentioned last, if at all. They always were. "And humanity," Zorvac finally said, almost as an afterthought, "will assist with refugee management and supply transport." That was it. 47 human colonies, home to 12 billion people, reduced to moving boxes and taking care of scared civilians. Elena's teammate, General Marcus Chen, leaned forward. "Chancellor, we have military forces ready to fight. Our ships may not be the newest, but our crews are well trained. We have tactical experience from the border wars." A sound like laughter came from somewhere in the crowd. It sounded like breaking glass. "General Chen," Zorvac said with the tone adults use when talking to children, "your species has been spacefaring for only 150 years. Some of us have been fighting wars longer than your entire civilization has existed. Your enthusiasm is noted, but war requires precision, strategy, and careful planning. These are not human strengths." Elena felt her jaw tighten. She had read the files on every species in this room. Humans had fought more wars in the last century than most of these civilizations had fought in their entire history. They had won most of them too. We understand combined arms tactics, Chen continued. Our soldiers are adaptable. They can think on their feet when plans fall apart. Plans should not fall apart, said a crystalline, its voice like wind chimes. Proper strategy accounts for all variables. Chaos is the enemy of victory. Sometimes chaos is exactly what you need, Elena said, standing up. The room went quiet. She could feel hundreds of alien eyes watching her. On Kepler 7, human Marines broke a 3-year siege by doing something the enemy never expected. They attacked uphill, at night, in a thunderstorm, with no air support. It worked because it was crazy. Precisely the problem, Zorvac replied. Warfare is mathematics. Calculate enemy strength, apply superior force, achieve victory. Your species treats battle like a game of chance. Maybe because that's what it really is, Elena said. You can plan all you want, but when the shooting starts, everything changes. Soldiers die, equipment breaks, communications fail. The side that adapts fastest wins. A buzz of conversation filled the hall. Most of it sounded disapproving. Humans, said one of the Tangent class beings, its voice like distant thunder, are known for violence and unpredictability. These traits have no place in civilized warfare. Elena wanted to laugh. Civilized warfare. As if there was anything civilized about turning entire planets into ash. The debate continued for 3 more days. Species after species presented their contributions. Advanced weapons, perfect coordination, massive ships, incredible technology. When humans tried to offer ideas, they were politely ignored or openly dismissed. On the final day, Zorvac announced the command structure. Elena listened as every major position went to older, more stable species. Humans were assigned to support roles only. Your species will provide transportation for refugees and manual labor for construction projects, Zorvac explained. This plays to your natural strengths, while ensuring the actual war planning remains in capable hands. Elena looked around the room. These beings were about to fight an enemy that had destroyed 17 star systems without losing a single battle. Their plan was to use the same old tactics that every other species had always used. The same predictable strategies that had failed completely against the entropy swarm. She stood up slowly. The hall grew quiet again. Chancellor Zorvac, we came here willing to die alongside you. We offered our ships, our soldiers, our ideas. You've decided we're only good for carrying bags and digging holes. Her voice stayed calm, but her eyes were hard as steel. In that case, humanity withdraws from these accords. She turned and walked toward the door. The other 11 humans followed without a word. Behind them, the silence stretched like a held breath. 200 species sat frozen, watching the humans leave. Ambassador Vasquez, Zorvac called out. You cannot simply walk away from your responsibilities. Elena stopped at the door and looked back. We just did. The door closed behind them with a soft click that seemed to echo forever. The second day of meetings started badly and got worse. Elena sat in the uncomfortable chair assigned to the human delegation and watched the galaxy's greatest minds make the same mistakes over and over again. The main screen showed battle plans that looked like engineering blueprints. Straight lines, perfect formations, numbered sequences. Everything neat and orderly. The kind of plans that looked beautiful in a classroom but fell apart the moment someone started shooting. Phase 1 establishes defensive lines at these coordinates, explained General Thys of the Hegemony military. His scales caught the light as he pointed to the display. Each line will hold for a calculated period before retreating to the next position. This will allow civilian evacuations while wearing down enemy forces. Elena had seen this strategy before. The Zarkonian Empire had used the same approach during the Second Border War. It had worked well until human forces started hitting their supply lines and attacking from unexpected directions. Neat defensive lines were beautiful until someone ignored the rules and went around them. What happens when they don't attack your lines directly? Asked General Chen. What if they just go around them? Or split into smaller groups? The crystalline representative made that wind chime sound again. The mathematical models account for all probable enemy actions. Deviation from optimal strategy results in defeat. The entropy swarm will attack our strongest positions because they are logical. Maybe they're not logical, Chen replied. Maybe they're smart enough to do whatever we don't expect. Impossible, said Dr. Vrex, the Council's chief military strategist. His species, the calculators, looked like metal spiders with too many eyes. Intelligence naturally tends toward efficient solutions. Random behavior indicates lack of intelligence, not greater intelligence. Elena bit her tongue. She wanted to point out that human forces had beaten the calculator's own fleet in war games 3 years ago, using exactly the kind of random behavior they claimed was stupid. But nobody had asked for her opinion. The debate dragged on. Every suggestion the humans made was shot down before they could finish explaining it. When Marcus mentioned guerrilla warfare, the council dismissed it as primitive chaos. When Elena suggested using psychological tactics to confuse the enemy, they told her that advanced species are immune to such manipulation. By noon, Elena was ready to scream. The afternoon session focused on resource allocation. Each species would contribute ships, weapons, supplies, or specialized knowledge. The crystallines offered their shield technology. The Zephyrians would provide perfect coordination between fleet elements. The machine-like builders would construct massive defensive stations. When they reached humanity's contribution, Chancellor Zorvac barely looked at his notes. Earth and its colonies will provide transport vessels for refugee operations. Human personnel will assist with construction, labor, and supply distribution. Your manufacturing capacity will be directed toward basic materials and support equipment. Elena felt her heart sink. Chancellor, our shipyards can build warships. Our factories can produce weapons and military equipment. We have combat experience. Your shipyards produce adequate vessels for patrol duties, Zorvac replied dismissively. Your weapons technology lags behind galactic standards by approximately 50 years. As for combat experience, fighting small conflicts with primitive species hardly qualifies as preparation for this war. Those primitive species include the Zarkonian Empire, Elena said. The same empire that held off 3 hegemony fleets for 6 months. 1712, with his not hopes Potok tell. 1712, of the Zarkonian Empire. The Zarkonians were desperate and illogical, said Dr. Vrex. They relied on unpredictable tactics that prolonged the conflict unnecessarily. Proper strategy would have ended the war much sooner. Elena wanted to laugh. The Zarkonians had prolonged the conflict by refusing to lose. They had used hit-and-run attacks, false retreats, and surprise raids to tie up forces 10 times their size. Exactly the kind of tactics that might work against an enemy like the entropy swarm. What about intelligence gathering? Asked Commander Sarah Kim, one of the younger human officers. Our scout ships are fast and hard to detect. We could provide reconnaissance. Reconnaissance will be handled by species with appropriate sensor technology and analytical capabilities, Zorvac answered. Humans will focus on tasks suited to their abilities. Elena's hands clenched into fists. Suited to their abilities. Like they were children being given easy jobs while the adults did the real work. The meeting continued. Every proposal from the human delegation was rejected. Every offer of military assistance was declined. They were told their ships were too small, their weapons too weak, their soldiers too unpredictable. Finally, Dr. Vrex unveiled the complete organizational chart. Elena stared at it in growing anger. Humans were listed under support services, along with species that hadn't fought a war in centuries. Meanwhile, civilizations that had never won a major conflict were given command positions. This is our final assignment structure, Zorvac announced. Humanity will coordinate refugee movements and provide manual labor for defensive construction. These roles are vital to our overall success. Elena stood up slowly. The room fell silent. Let me understand this correctly, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast hall. You want us to move scared civilians around while you fight the war with the same tactics that have already failed 17 times? The previous defenders were isolated and unprepared, Zorvac replied. Our combined forces will succeed where individual species failed. Combined forces using individual tactics. Elena shot back. The crystallines will make shields. The Zephyrians will coordinate. The Titans will charge forward in straight lines. Everything neat, orderly, and completely predictable. Murmurs of disapproval rippled through the crowd. Elena didn't care. You know what the entropy swarm is going to do when they see your beautiful, logical battle plans? They're going to tear them apart. They'll hit your flanks while you're focused on the center. They'll attack your supplies while your main forces are engaged. They'll do everything your mathematical models say is impossible. Human theories are noted, Zorvak said coldly. However, this council relies on proven methods and logical analysis, not wild speculation and emotional outbursts. Elena felt something snap inside her chest. Emotional outbursts? She repeated. Is that what you call tactical analysis? Let me tell you something about human military history. We've been fighting wars since before we could write. We've survived ice ages, plagues, and disasters that would have wiped out most species. We've fought each other with sticks and stones, and we've fought alien empires with nuclear weapons. You know what we learned? She looked around the room, meeting alien eyes of every shape and color. We learned that the only thing you can count on in war is that your plans will fail. The winner isn't the one with the best plan. It's the one who adapts fastest when everything goes wrong. The hall erupted in angry voices. Several species demanded she be removed for insulting the council's wisdom. Others called humans dangerous and unstable. Chancellor Zorvak raised his hand for silence. When the noise died down, his voice was ice cold. Ambassador Vasquez, your species' reputation for violence and chaos precedes you. That is precisely why you will not be involved in strategic planning. Your role is to support your betters, not to pretend you understand civilized warfare. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. Support your betters. As if humans were some kind of servant species, useful only for carrying things and digging holes. She looked around the room one more time. These beings were about to fight for the survival of their galaxy, using strategies that had failed every single time they were tested. They would rather lose than admit that maybe, just maybe, the newest species in the council might have something valuable to contribute. Betters, she repeated quietly. Then louder. Our betters. Elena picked up her datapad and tucked it under her arm. She looked directly at Chancellor Zorvak. Chancellor, we came here ready to bleed and die for this galaxy. We offered our ships, our knowledge, and our lives. You've made it clear that you see us as nothing more than manual laborers who should be grateful for the chance to serve our superiors. She turned toward the exit. The other 11 humans rose and followed her. In that case, Elena called over her shoulder, humanity formally withdraws from the Void War Accords. You can save the galaxy without us. You cannot abandon your responsibilities, Zorvak shouted after her. The entropy swarm threatens every living being in the galaxy, including humanity. Elena stopped at the door and looked back one final time. Then I guess you better hope your mathematical models are right. The door closed behind them with a soft sound that seemed to echo through the sudden, absolute silence of the Great Hall. The Great Hall buzzed with excited conversation after the humans left. Chancellor Zorvak allowed himself a small smile as he watched the door close behind Ambassador Vasquez and her delegation. Finally, he announced to the assembled species, we can proceed with proper military planning without constant interruption from chaos theorists. Applause echoed through the chamber. The crystallines hummed in harmony, their bodies flashing with pleased patterns of light. The calculators clicked their approval, metal limbs tapping against their chairs in perfect rhythm. Dr. Vrex activated the main display again, showing the detailed battle plans they had spent 3 days perfecting. Without human interference, we can implement these strategies exactly as designed. Mathematical precision will triumph over random destruction. General Thiss nodded approvingly. The removal of unpredictable elements from our forces will increase efficiency by 37%. Our coordination will be flawless. Over the following weeks, the Galactic Defense Force came together with impressive speed. Crystalline shield ships took their positions in perfect geometric formations. Zephyrian squadrons moved as single organisms, each ship responding instantly to collective thought. Tangent-class beings positioned themselves at strategic points like living fortresses. The first defensive line stretched across the Kepler sector, a marvel of military engineering. Massive shield generators created overlapping energy barriers. Weapon platforms held precise firing solutions on every possible approach route. Supply lines ran in straight, efficient paths protected by secondary defenses. It was beautiful. Every ship in exactly the right place. Every weapon aimed at optimal targets. Every communication channel operating on scheduled frequencies. The kind of defense that military academies would study for generations. Commander Zale of the Hegemony Fleet stood on his bridge and admired the display screens showing their formations. "Perfect order," he murmured. "The enemy will break themselves against our logic." The entropy swarm arrived on schedule, exactly when the mathematical models predicted they would. At first, everything went according to plan. The enemy approached in what appeared to be random formations, just chaotic enough to trigger the defense protocols. Crystalline shields activated in sequence. Zephyrian squadrons moved to intercept. Tangent-class beings prepared for frontal assault. The opening exchange lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes, precisely as calculated. The defense force traded measured volleys with the entropy entities, each side testing the other's strength and capabilities. Then something changed. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kess from the sensor station. "Enemy formations are shifting." Commander Zale studied the display. The entropy forces were reorganizing, but not in any pattern the computer models recognized. "Are they retreating?" "Negative, sir. They're—" The word sent a chill down Zale's spine, but he pushed the feeling aside. Adaptation took time. The mathematical models accounted for normal learning curves. Enemy forces always tried to adjust their tactics after initial contact, but this was different. The entropy swarm wasn't slowly learning. They were evolving in real time. Every defensive measure the Allies used, the enemy countered within minutes. When crystalline shields projected barriers at frequency A, the swarm immediately switched to attacks that bypassed frequency A completely. "How are they adapting so quickly?" asked Dr. Yilan Okafor from the Strategic Analysis Center. She was a member of the cerebral species, beings whose enlarged brains could process vast amounts of information simultaneously. If anyone could understand what was happening, it would be her. "Unknown," Zale replied, watching his carefully planned formations crumble. "But it doesn't matter. We have contingency protocols." They activated Plan B, then Plan C, then emergency protocols D through K. Each time, the entropy swarm adapted faster than seemed possible. They weren't just learning the Allies' tactics, they were learning how the Allies thought. 12 hours into the battle, the first defensive line collapsed completely. "All ships, retreat to secondary positions," Zale ordered. His voice stayed calm, but sweat ran down his scaled face. "Execute withdrawal pattern 7. The retreat went perfectly. Every ship moved to its assigned position without confusion or delay. The secondary defensive line activated exactly as designed. Everything was orderly, precise, and logical, which was exactly why it failed. The entropy swarm hit the secondary positions before the Allies had finished deploying. Not because they were faster, but because they had perfectly predicted where every ship would go. The mathematical models that made the defense so efficient had also made it completely predictable. Within 18 hours, the entire Kepler sector was gone. Not destroyed. Gone. Empty space where 3-star systems used to exist. Dr. Okafor stared at her readings in growing horror. She ran the battle analysis 17 times, checking for errors in the data. But the numbers were clear. The entropy swarm hadn't just won. They had grown stronger during the fight. "This is impossible," she whispered. Chancellor Zorvac convened an emergency session of the Galactic Council. Representatives gathered with shocked faces and trembling voices. The greatest military minds in the galaxy had been utterly defeated in less than a day. "How did they penetrate our defenses so easily?" demanded General Thiss. "Our formations were perfect. Our coordination was flawless." "That's exactly the problem," Dr. Okafor said quietly. The hall fell silent. All eyes turned to the cerebral scientist as she approached the main display. "I've analyzed every second of the battle," she continued. "The entropy swarm doesn't just consume matter and energy. They consume information, patterns, order itself." She activated a holographic replay of the battle, slowed down to show details that had been invisible during the actual fighting. "Watch this sequence," she said, highlighting a section where crystalline ships had activated their shields. "The moment our ships establish a defensive pattern, the enemy adapts to counter it. But look at the timing." The replay zoomed in on the precise moments when the swarm changed tactics. The adaptation wasn't happening after they observed the Allied strategy. It was happening the instant the strategy was implemented. "They're not learning our tactics, Dr. Okafor explained, her voice growing more frightened with each word. "They're reading our intentions. Our logical thought processes feed them information about what we're going to do before we do it." Chancellor Zorvac leaned forward. "That's impossible. You're suggesting they can read minds." "Not minds. Patterns. Logic follows predictable paths. When faced with situation A, rational beings choose response B. The more logical and organized we are, the easier we become to predict." She pulled up more data, showing how the entropy forces had grown stronger throughout the battle. Every time we acted logically, they gained strength. Our perfect formations gave them perfect targets. Our efficient communications told them exactly what we were planning. Our mathematical strategies fed them all the information they needed to destroy us. The implications hit the Council like a physical blow. Their greatest strength had become their greatest weakness. The very intelligence and logic they prized above all else was feeding the enemy. "Then how do we fight them?" asked one of the Titangen-class beings, its voice rumbling with confused anger. Dr. Okafor looked around the hall at hundreds of faces representing the galaxy's most advanced civilizations. All of them logical, all of them predictable, all of them absolutely useless against an enemy that fed on order and reason. "I don't know," she admitted. "Every strategy I can think of, they'll be able to counter. Every logical approach will make them stronger. We need something illogical, something random, something so chaotic that even we don't know what we're doing." The hall erupted in panicked voices. Species that had never known fear in 10,000 years of existence suddenly faced an enemy they couldn't understand or fight. In the chaos, one voice cut through the noise like a blade. "The humans." Chancellor Zorvac had spoken so quietly that only those closest to him heard it at first. But the words spread through the hall like fire. The humans. The chaotic, unpredictable, illogical humans who had walked out 3 days ago. The species they had dismissed as too random and violent for civilized warfare. "We need the humans," Zorvac said again, louder this time. Dr. Okafor nodded slowly. They were right. Complete chaos might be our only chance. The Great Hall fell silent as the galaxy's most powerful beings faced a terrible truth. To save their ordered civilization, they needed to embrace everything they had spent millennia trying to eliminate. They needed chaos. They needed unpredictability. They needed humanity. But first, they had to convince the humans to come back. And after the insults and dismissals of the past week, that might be harder than fighting the entropy swarm itself. Chancellor Zorvac stood before the emergency council session, his silver scales dulled with exhaustion. 3 more star systems had fallen while they debated their next move. The entropy swarm was expanding faster than their worst projections, and conventional tactics had proven worse than useless. "We need to contact Earth immediately," he announced. "Request their return to the Alliance." General Thiss shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Chancellor, they walked out on us. They abandoned their duty to the galaxy." "No." Dr. Okafor interjected from her position at the analysis station. "We abandoned them. We refused to listen to exactly the kind of thinking we now desperately need." The debate that followed was painful. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive and chaotic now had to admit they might have made a mistake. Pride warred with desperation as reports came in of more systems falling to the entropy swarm. Finally, Zorvac made the decision: prepare a diplomatic mission to Earth, offer them full restoration to the Council with equal voting rights. "What if they refuse?" asked Dr. Vrex. Zorvac looked at the star map where red markers showed the advancing enemy. Then we all die with our pride intact. The diplomatic ship Times, Concordance Times, arrived at Earth 3 days later. Ambassador Thylon of the hegemony expected to find a frightened planet, ready to beg for protection and accept any terms for readmission to the galactic community. Instead, he found humanity at war. Earth's orbital defenses were a mess. Ships moved in patterns that hurt Thylon's eyes to follow. Defensive satellites hung in formations that violated every principle of military engineering. Supply convoys took routes that seemed designed to waste fuel and time. It was complete chaos. And somehow, it was working. Ambassador Thylon, came a voice over the communication channel. This is Admiral Rebecca Torres, Earth Defense Command. State your business. Admiral Torres, I come bearing an offer from the Galactic Council to restore humanity to full membership in the Alliance against the Entropy Swarm. There was a long pause. When Torres spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. That's interesting. Last week we weren't civilized enough for your war. What changed? Thylon swallowed his pride. We have encountered difficulties with our current strategies. The Council believes human input could be valuable. Another pause. Then laughter. Actual laughter. Human input, Torres repeated. Is that what you're calling it? Admiral, let me show you something. The main screen activated, showing a tactical display of the local sector. Thylon stared in confusion at what he saw. Red dots marked entropy forces throughout the region. But instead of the organized advance pattern they had shown everywhere else, these forces seemed scattered and confused. Some groups moved forward, others retreated, and still others spun in seemingly random circles. What am I looking at? Thylon asked. You're looking at the first time anyone has stopped the entropy swarm, Torres replied. We've been fighting them for 6 days. They haven't taken a single human system. Thylon's scaled hands gripped his chair. How? Come aboard my flagship, and I'll show you. An hour later, Thylon stood on the bridge of the battleship Times Defiance Asterisk, trying to understand what he was seeing. The ship's bridge looked like organized chaos. Crew members seemed to be working at random stations. Orders were being given in no particular sequence. Half the displays showed information that had nothing to do with current operations. Captain Kim, Admiral Torres called to a woman who was apparently commanding a fleet engagement while standing on her head. Show our guest the Brisbane maneuver. Captain Sarah Kim grinned without changing position. With pleasure, Admiral. She pressed several buttons in what seemed like a random sequence. All ships, execute pattern rainbow fish. On the tactical display, the human fleet suddenly scattered like startled birds. Ships that had been in formation broke off in different directions. Some headed straight for the enemy, others flew away from the battle entirely. 3 ships started spinning while firing their weapons in random directions. The entropy forces, which had been advancing in an organized pattern, suddenly stopped. They seemed to hover in space, as if trying to process what they were seeing. They're confused, Thylon breathed. More than confused, Torres said. They're starving. The entropy swarm feeds on predictable patterns. We're giving them the opposite. Thylon watched as the chaotic human formations somehow managed to surround and destroy the enemy forces. Ships that had seemed to be fleeing suddenly turned around and attacked from unexpected angles. The spinning vessels turned out to be perfectly positioned to cover their allies' retreat. How do you coordinate this? He asked. How do your crews know what to do? Captain Kim finally turned right side up. We don't. That's the point. She led him to a station covered with dice, playing cards, and what appeared to be children's toys. This is our tactical planning center, she explained. When we need to make a decision, we roll dice. When we need to choose a formation, we draw cards. When we need to plan an attack, we spin this wheel. She indicated a colorful spinner that looked like it belonged in a game. Thylon stared in horror. You're making life and death decisions with games of chance? Not chance, Torres corrected. Chaos. There's a difference. Chance still has patterns. True chaos has no patterns at all. That's what makes it impossible to predict or counter. She pulled up more tactical data. Look at this battle from 3 hours ago. My fleet was outnumbered 4-1. In any logical engagement, we should have been destroyed. But we used what we call the drunk navigation protocol. Drunk navigation? Every ship sets its course by having the navigator spin around 10 times and then point in a random direction. No computers, no calculations, no logic at all. Pure random movement. The tactical replay showed human ships weaving drunkenly through space, while entropy forces tried desperately to target them. The enemy weapons kept missing because they couldn't predict where the human ships would go next. The beauty of it, Captain Kim added, is that we couldn't predict where we were going either. I had no idea where my own ship would be from 1 minute to the next. Thailand felt dizzy. Everything he believed about military strategy was being turned upside down. But how did you win? How did you coordinate attacks? We didn't coordinate, Torres said. We set one simple rule. Attack anything that looks like an enemy. No tactics, no strategy, no plans. Just point and shoot whenever you see a target. The replay showed the chaotic result. Human ships attacked from every direction at once, not because they planned to, but because pure randomness had scattered them throughout the battlefield. The entropy forces, unable to process such complete chaos, had simply collapsed. This is insane, Thailand whispered. Yes, Torres agreed cheerfully. Complete insanity, and it works. Over the next few hours, Thailand observed more human engagements. He watched a destroyer defeat 3 enemy cruisers by flying backwards while its captain composed poetry. He saw a fighter squadron win a battle by having each pilot choose their targets by asking their pet goldfish. He witnessed a fleet commander make strategic decisions by letting his 5-year-old daughter draw pictures with crayons. Each engagement was a victory. Not because the humans were stronger or smarter, but because they were so completely, utterly unpredictable that the entropy swarm couldn't adapt to them. When Thailand finally returned to his ship, his worldview had been shattered and rebuilt. He sent his report back to the Galactic Council with hands that still trembled. The response came within hours. Chancellor Zorvac himself appeared on the communication screen, his face desperate. Ambassador Thailand, did you secure humanity's agreement to rejoin the Alliance? They haven't given me an answer yet, Thailand replied. They're considering our offer. What terms do they want? Thailand looked down at his notes. The list Elena Vasquez had given him was surprisingly short and completely non-negotiable. Full strategic autonomy for all human forces, he read. No oversight from Galactic Command. No requirement to follow standard tactical procedures. Complete authority to implement what they call chaos doctrine in any battle they participate in. Zorvac's face went pale. They want us to give them complete control? Not control. Freedom. Freedom to fight the way they know how to fight. Thailand paused. Chancellor, I've seen what they can do. They're not just surviving against the entropy swarm, they're winning. And their other demands? Representation in the Galactic Council proportional to their military contribution rather than their size. And a formal apology from the Council for the treatment they received during the original negotiations. The screen went quiet for a long moment. Thailand could see other Council members gathering behind Zorvac, their faces showing mixtures of desperation and wounded pride. Finally, Zorvac spoke. And if we refuse these terms? Thailand looked out his viewport at Earth, where ships moved in patterns that defied logic while successfully defending their homeworld. Then they'll keep protecting their own territory while the rest of us lose the war. Another long silence. In the background, an aide handed Zorvac a datapad with more casualty reports. Tell them we accept, Zorvac said quietly. All of it. Thailand nodded and closed the communication channel. Then he sent a message to Admiral Torres. Within 6 hours, the first human fleet was already moving toward the front lines, their ships scattering in formations that looked like abstract art. Behind them came supply convoys that followed routes drawn by children with finger paints. The galaxy was about to learn what warfare looked like when chaos itself became a weapon. Admiral Jackson Reed stood on the bridge of his flagship Times, Beautiful Disaster Asterisk, watching the largest fleet in galactic history prepare for battle. 50,000 ships from dozens of species spread across space in what could generously be called a formation, if you squinted and tilted your head sideways. Reed was a short, gray-haired man who looked more like a librarian than a fleet commander. His uniform was wrinkled, his shoes were untied, and he was currently using a magic 8-ball to make tactical decisions. The alien officers serving under him looked like they were fighting constant headaches. "Admiral," reported Commander Zix, a nervous crystalline whose body flickered with stress patterns. "The fleet is arranged, as requested." Reed glanced at the tactical display and smiled. Human ships were scattered randomly throughout the formation. Some flew upside down for no reason. Others had painted themselves bright colors that made no sense from a camouflage perspective. One destroyer was flying in lazy circles because its captain was trying to spell out his daughter's name with the ship's movement pattern. Mixed among the human vessels were ships from other species, all trying to follow what Reed called chaos doctrine. It was painful to watch. Crystalline ships, designed for perfect formation flying, were deliberately breaking apart their geometric patterns. Zephyrian squadrons were forcing themselves to think independently instead of sharing one mind. Titingen-class beings were practicing moving in ways that made no tactical sense whatsoever. "Status report from all sections," Reed ordered. "Engine room reports all systems are running backward but somehow still working," came the first reply. "Weapons department is loading the cannons with confetti along with the regular ammunition. Navigation has thrown their computers overboard and is steering by watching cloud formations. Medical bay is playing children's music at full volume to keep morale up." Reed nodded approvingly. "Perfect. We're as unprepared as we can possibly be." The entropy swarm appeared exactly on schedule, emerging from the void between galaxies like a tide of living darkness. Their forces moved in patterns that seemed random, but hid a terrible intelligence. They had learned from every battle, adapted to every strategy, and grown stronger with each victory. For 6 months, they had swept across the galaxy, consuming entire civilizations. Nothing had been able to stop them. Until now. "All ships," Reed announced over the fleet-wide channel. "Remember the one and only rule of engagement. Do whatever the enemy doesn't expect, even if you don't expect it either." The battle began with what became known as the Proxima Nexus Incident. Instead of forming defensive lines or coordinating attacks, the 50,000 Allied ships simply scattered. Each captain was given complete freedom to do whatever seemed like a good idea at the moment. The results were beautiful chaos. Captain Maria Santos of the Cruiser Times Random Tuesday Times decided to attack by flying straight up from the battle plane, while her crew sang opera at the top of their lungs. Her ship's beautiful music somehow interfered with enemy communications in ways no one had expected. Commander Thrak, a Titangent class being the size of a small moon, chose to fight by doing barrel rolls while juggling asteroids. The sight was so absurd that nearby human crews started laughing uncontrollably, which for some reason boosted their accuracy by 30%. The Destroyer Times, Chaos Theory Times, attacked enemy forces by flying backwards while painting murals on its hull. The colorful artwork confused enemy targeting systems that had been designed to track sensible-looking starships. For the first time in the war, the entropy swarm showed something like confusion. Their adaptive algorithms, which had been able to counter every logical strategy, couldn't find patterns in pure randomness. When they tried to adapt to one human tactic, the humans had already moved on to something completely different. Reed watched the battle unfold with growing excitement. "Commander Zix, order Section 7 to implement the drunk elephant maneuver." "Sir, there is no drunk elephant maneuver in any tactical manual." "Exactly. Make something up. The more ridiculous the better." Section 7. Led by a human captain who had apparently named his ship after his pet hamster, responded by having his entire squadron fly in formation while playing an elaborate game of follow the leader. The enemy forces trying to intercept them got so confused by the nonsensical flight patterns that they started firing at each other. The battle turned into something between a war and a performance art piece. Fighter pilots attacked by forming geometric shapes with their flight paths. Bomber crews dropped their payloads while performing synchronized dance numbers. One human captain won a crucial engagement by having his crew switch positions every 5 minutes, including making the cook serve as navigator and the janitor run the weapons systems. The entropy swarm, which had fed on order and logic for millions of years, began to show signs of something like indigestion. They were used to consuming predictable energy patterns, not the beautiful mess that human chaos created. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Chen from the sensor station, "the enemy forces are retreating?" Reed looked at the tactical display in amazement. For the first time since the war began, the entropy swarm was actually backing away from a battle. Their formations, which had been advancing steadily, were now pulling back in what looked like confusion. "They're not retreating," Reed realized. "They're starving." Dr. Okafor's voice came over the communication channel from her research ship. "Admiral, the energy readings are incredible. The entropy entities are losing cohesion. They can't process random information. It's like feeding noise to a computer designed for music." Reed grinned. "Then let's give them more noise than they can handle. All ships, implement Final Paradox Protocol." The Final Paradox Protocol was humanity's ultimate expression of chaos theory applied to warfare. Instead of trying to destroy the entropy swarm with weapons, they would destroy it with pure, concentrated randomness. Every ship in the human fleet began broadcasting everything they could think of. Earth's greatest literature. From Shakespeare to science fiction novels, children's songs and death metal music, cooking shows and philosophical debates, stand-up comedy routines and mathematical proofs, sports commentary and meditation guides. All of it transmitted directly at the enemy forces. But the real weapon wasn't the content, it was the contradictions. Human culture was beautifully, impossibly contradictory. Poems about peace written during wars, songs about sadness that made people happy, stories about heroes who were also villains, philosophical systems that proved their own impossibility, scientific theories that questioned the nature of science itself. The entropy swarm, which had spent eons consuming orderly information, suddenly found itself trying to process the complete, glorious chaos of human thought. Every attempt to find patterns led to contradictions. Every effort to understand led to more confusion. "They're breaking apart," reported Dr. Okafor, her voice filled with wonder. "The enemy formations are losing cohesion completely. They can't maintain their structure when exposed to pure paradox." Across the battlefield, the dark entities that made up the entropy swarm began to flicker and fade. Not destroyed by weapons, but confused out of existence by ideas that refused to make sense. They had evolved to feed on order, and now they were choking on chaos. The retreat began as a trickle and became a flood. Entropy forces throughout the galaxy suddenly pulled back, fleeing toward the empty spaces between galaxies where they had slept for eons. Behind them, they left a galaxy full of beings who had learned something important about the value of controlled chaos. 3 months after the Battle of Proxima Nexus, Elena Vasquez stood once again in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council, but this time, the human delegation sat at the center of the chamber, not hidden in a corner. The hall itself had changed. Gone were the rigid geometric patterns and perfect order. The new design embraced curves and unexpected angles. The lighting shifted randomly through subtle color changes. Even the seating arrangements had been mixed up, with species scattered throughout the chamber instead of sitting in neat tribal groups. Chancellor Zorvac approached the human section, moving slowly like an old man learning to walk again. His silver scales looked brighter than they had in years. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the much more acoustically interesting hall. "On behalf of the Galactic Council, I formally thank humanity for saving our civilization." Elena stood and smiled. "We didn't save it, Chancellor. We helped it remember that civilization doesn't have to mean rigid order. Sometimes the strongest societies are the ones that can dance with chaos." The ceremony that followed was unlike any in galactic history. Instead of formal speeches and mathematical presentations, there was music. Human jazz mixed with crystalline harmonic resonance and Zephyrian collective humming. The result shouldn't have worked, but it was beautiful. The new council charter, written jointly by humans and the galaxy's other species, contained principles that would have horrified the old guard. Diversity of thought was to be prized over consensus. Unpredictable solutions were to be considered alongside logical ones. Chaos was recognized as a natural and necessary part of any healthy system. Most importantly, no species would ever again be dismissed for thinking differently. Reed, now promoted to Grand Admiral of Allied Forces, kept an office that perfectly captured the new spirit of galactic civilization. His desk was covered with tactical manuals and children's toys. His walls displayed both mathematical equations and finger paintings. A goldfish bowl sat next to his command console, because some of his best strategic decisions still came from asking the fish what it thought. On his desk, next to reports from across the galaxy, sat a small plaque that Elena had given him. It read, "In chaos, strength." The galaxy was louder now, messier, less predictable. Ships still sometimes painted themselves silly colors for no reason. Military exercises occasionally involved dance-offs. Strategic planning meetings might include poetry readings, but it was also stronger, more adaptable, more alive, and somewhere in the empty spaces between galaxies, ancient entities slept uneasily, haunted by dreams of beings who had learned to fight with laughter, lead with confusion, and win by losing their minds. The galaxy had learned to embrace its beautiful chaos, and it would never be the same.